Let me tell you something. Supernatural cosmetic surgery? My guest, Nasir Siddiki. Let me ask you a question, Nasir.
Yes.
I'm going to take you to the hospital room.
Yes.
When for the first time you got out of your bed,
Yes.
you went to the mirror,
Yes.
you looked at your face, your body. What did you see?
That morning I got out of bed, wanted to go to the bathroom. I climbed out and walked to the adjoining bathroom. As I opened the door, I looked in, and what I saw made me bring up. I started to actually bring up, and what I saw was a deformed head with blisters 1 inch in size. This ear so deformed it was touching this shoulder, and blisters all the way down the side of my head, the side of the face, the neck, and the shoulder. I could not believe I was looking at my own face. I don't know if you ever saw The Elephant Man, but this side of my face was totally deformed.
When you saw that, obviously, horror,
Yes.
fear.
Yes.
What else? What did you think? Well, this is just another problem that I will take care of?
No, I could not face, this is a problem that I could take care of. That morning, for the first time in my life, I had got a pen and a piece of paper and I wrote my will. I knew there was something wrong with me and something that was very serious. I didn't know what it was.
Let me take you back to a young boy. Your father was born in Egypt. You were born in Pakistan.
Yes.
You're going for a nice family drive.
Yes.
Near Paris.
Yes.
And what happened?
I remember we were in this car. It was we were driving just outside of the city of Paris, and as we were going around this corner, a bus hit us head on, totally destroyed the car, and the next thing I remember, I was lying half in the car, half out. As I crawled out of the car,
this is not supposed to happen to us. This happens to someone else. It's like a 9-year-old happy go. What was your life like before?
I was brought up in a Muslim home. My father, my mother, brother and a sister, we had a wonderful home. We were traveling on holiday. Everything was going fine. The last thing I thought was we would ever get into a car accident. My mother would die.
Were you fairly prosperous?
Yes, yes. My father was a very educated man. He was a professor. He was a teacher for many years in England, in London.
Okay, so you remembered crawling out of the car.
Yes.
Then what?
Yes. I saw the man climb back into his bus and drive away, and I was screaming at him. There was blood pouring down my leg, and as I came back to the car, there was just no sign of life. My mother had died. I didn't know that. I couldn't wake her up. I couldn't wake my father up. I didn't know he was in a coma. My brother and my sister were both knocked unconscious, and they were lying in the car. I just got on my knees and I just started crying. I didn't know what to do. Everyone was speaking French. I didn't know their language. And then a bus stopped of Boy Scouts that spoke English, and they called the ambulance and took us to the hospital. It was strange being in a hospital where nobody spoke your language.
For a 9-year-old, when did you realize that your mother died? What happened to your father?
My father was in a coma for a month. They had to take a bone out of his leg and put it in his arm. They didn't know if he was going to come out of the coma. My sister was the only one that went to my mother's funeral. They buried her just outside of Paris. And they just kind of kept it quiet. They didn't tell us until we were ready to leave the hospital, which was 1 month later, and then I found out that my mother wasn't coming with us.
What effect did this have on you?
My whole life fell apart. We went back to England, and my father was not capable of taking care of us, and next thing you know, my sister was in one foster home, and my brother was in another foster home, and the whole family was totally separated, and my whole world fell apart.
But you took this horrible tragedy, and sometimes when people go through a tragedy like this, they're through, they're finished, they're wiped out. But instead, you had a cause.
Yes.
You were
Yes.
driven. That be a fair word?
I realized early in my life that being 9 years old without a mother, without a father, that you had to make it on your own. And so I would end up doing 2 paper routes in the morning and washing dishes at night, and I just knew that if it was going to happen, if I was going to have to make it myself. I became very independent, started traveling through Europe at age 13, and I knew that I was going to have to make it happen. And I knew that if I could find success in money, in finances, if I had money, I know I could take care of everything. So I was driven, yes. I was going after success.
So you became a national sales director of a major life insurance company.
Yes, yes.
How successful were you at your peak?
At my peak, I had, in 18 months, I had reached a position that most people take 5 to 10 years to reach. I was working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. I wasn't sleeping right, wasn't eating right.
Nasir, you're exaggerating.
No,
18 hours a day.
I'm very serious. I would go home for 3-4 hours and then go straight back to the office. I was single, and my whole life was totally committed to making financial success. That's what I was chasing after.
And you achieved that. How successful?
I became the fastest promoted national sales director, who reached a position where I was making a 6-figure income. I could drive any car I wanted, live anywhere I wanted, travel around the world. I had achieved the epitome of success in this organization.
And you had it, and yet you told me you were depressed. Yes. I don't understand. Come on now, that's not logical. I'm a logical person.
I'm logical too. I didn't understand.
That's 2 logical people, a Muslim and a Jew. So come on, explain. Why were you depressed, Nasir?
I don't know. There was something missing in my life. I found myself, after reaching the peak of success, I was going to these horoscopes, and I found out they didn't have the answer. I went to even a teacup reader and trying to find out what my future held. And you know, the tea was good, but they didn't read anything in those tea leaves, and I couldn't find the answer. There was something wrong. I was in a deep depression.
And you met a girl that you work with by the name of Anita, who took you home for Thanksgiving dinner, and what happened?
Well, I was trying to make a good impression on her parents, and
you're a salesman.
I remember right after dinner, we were sitting on the couch, and I was talking to her mother, and in the middle of a sentence said, I actually fell asleep.
No.
I fell asleep? That's
a
not
salesman?
I know, you
a
can't
top
impress.
sales manager?
I know. I knew there was something wrong with me. So I left.
You really
I
fell
asleep in the middle of a sentence.
What an impression to make.
I know. It wasn't a good impression. I remember I left that afternoon. I had a little rash on the side of my neck. I went to the local hospital where I lived, and they checked it out, and the doctor said, oh, no big deal. Take 2 Tylenol 2s, go to bed, you'll be fine in the morning. I went home that night, took the Tylenols, went to bed. Middle of the night, said, I remember I got up to go to the bathroom. As I stood in the bathroom, all of a sudden, just like that, I passed out. Hit the sink, I was out cold. When I came to, I could see the bottom of the sink. I stood up. As soon as I stood up, I passed out a second time. The second time I came to, I didn't even try and stand. There was something seriously wrong with me.
Nasir, hold that thought. We're going to be back right after this word. Don't go away.
Stay tuned as Nasir comes face to face with an unexpected supernatural presence. But first, this.
We have Nasir Siddiki here, and Anita, the young lady who invited him home for dinner. Anita, really, between the two of us, what did you think when Nasir falls asleep at Thanksgiving dinner?
I was ticked off.
No, that's mild.
Well, I really liked the man, and here I was trying to introduce him to my mother, and I thought, boy, the nerve.
So he excused himself. You went home and pick up from there.
Well, as I was saying, you know, I crawled back into the bedroom, and I looked in the mirror, and this time the blisters had started to grow. They were 1/2 inch in size. I knew there was something seriously wrong. I phoned Anita and I said, you better come over and take me to the hospital. She came over. We drove.
How late was it at night?
This was 7 o'clock in the morning.
7 in the morning? Anita, he falls asleep on your parents, then he calls you at 7 a.m. and says, Anita, I need a favor. What's going on with Anita?
I wasn't sure what was with him. It was unlike him to do that. He was a man that was always busy doing something. Everything had its schedule, and it didn't make sense. It was very out of the ordinary for him to do that.
So she took you to the hospital, then what?
Yes. The doctors diagnosed it as the worst case of shingles ever recorded at Toronto General Hospital. the pain was like somebody put gasoline on the side of your head and put a match to it, and you have to sit there and watch the skin burn. I remember I took a metal stretcher and I tried to break it in emergency because the pain was so bad. Finally, they got a room for me.
You had pain
Yes.
when your mother died
Yes.
as a 9-year-old,
Yes.
but it's a different type of pain.
Oh yes, this was
I
totally...
imagine you never thought you'd go through that kind of pain again.
Never. Never. My skin was burning up from the inside out. It was the worst experience I ever had. They put me in that hospital bed, and that's when I woke up in the morning in that hospital room and walked in that bathroom. And all of a sudden I was looking at a horror movie, and it was my own face, totally deformed with blisters all the way down the side of my head.
I didn't realize that shingles could be so devastating.
Yes. Yes.
Was it life-threatening?
Yes, what happened? It's the nerves burning the skin, Sid, from the inside out. And you could see blisters just kind of growing in front of your eyes and joining. Even the doctors and the nurses would not walk in without gloves and masks.
Why?
Because it's highly contagious. And even though it was highly contagious, they wouldn't walk in. Anita sat in there the whole time.
Anita? Why?
The man had no family there. He had nobody that cared for him enough to be there for him, and I just felt that I should be there for him. I only knew him for a short time, but I felt for the man.
I know, but it's contagious.
They told me it was contagious. In fact, they didn't even think it was only shingles. They thought it was something even worse. They just did not know.
Yes.
I don't understand why you stayed.
I think I was falling in love with him, perhaps. I also knew that he needed something in his life. I knew that he was searching.
He's a Muslim. You come from a Christian background. You were considering marrying a Muslim?
Well, I wasn't considering marrying him at the point.
But I did. So you're falling in love.
Well, I admired the man for certain reasons and for certain attributes that he carried, that he had. But I also knew that he was searching. And I knew that if there's nobody else for him, me as a Christian, I ought to at least stay by his side so that if he ever does have a question, I could at least reach out and have an answer for him. He was a self-made man. He was the kind of guy that would walk in a room and everybody would jump, snap his fingers, and they'd be there. And even though I had the answer, I wasn't able to give it to him because he wasn't going to receive anything from me. So while he was in the hospital, I thought, well, if he reaches out, at least maybe I would have the answer. And I have the answer. Maybe he'll receive it from me. He'll hear me. He'll listen to what I have to say. So that was my hope at the
I
time.
understand. What happened next, Nasir?
Next morning, I wake up in the hospital bed, blisters 1 inch in size. They're growing. It's getting worse.
Blisters 1 inch in size.
1 inch in size.
And you're telling me it was eating into the nerves, like in your brain?
Yes, from here all the way. This ear was deformed. This face was deformed. At one point, they wanted to sew the eye to try and save it. All this neck was totally covered in blisters. This shoulder right across this chest, and it was going down the back.
Anita, did you see this?
I sure did.
What did you think?
It was disgusting. It was something you wouldn't want to look at. It's so horrible you can't describe it. We tried to get somebody to come in and take a picture, and the picture didn't turn out. But it was so horrible. You'd vomit just to look at him. The doctors wouldn't come into the room.
I had a chicken pox the next morning, from the top of my head down to my toes. Now I've got blisters 1 inch in size, shingles, and chicken pox. That night, Sid, my temperature hits 107.6. Now, 104 is considered dangerous, as you know. 107.6, they call it hypothermia. Oxygen doesn't get to the brain, and the brain cooks itself. And I'm shivering with 12 blankets and a temperature of 107.6. They had no idea why the body was not fighting back. I remember the next day, 2 doctors came in. They stood on either side of the bed. I don't know what they looked like. They had masks on and gloves, and one looked at the other. And right there, they passed my death sentence. They said, we don't know why his body is not fighting back. It was as if my body had given up, and there was no fight left. And they said there was nothing that they could do. What do you do when the people that you have total faith and confidence in finally give up and leave you to die? That's the point that I had reached.
What did you do?
I had lost my strength, I'd lost my courage, I'd lost my determination, I I'd lost every single thing, and I would have given every penny that I owned just to live one more day. I was full of fear. I didn't know what was on the other side of death, but I knew I was afraid of it. And just out of desperation, as a drowning man going down for the third and last time, I cried out. I said, God, if you're real, don't let me die. Don't let me die. And I'm sitting here telling you, Sid, that God is real. Something happened that night. The evening before, the doctors called her out and said, if he makes it that night, I went into a semi-coma. I started to recount my childhood. They said, if he makes it that night, this ear could be blind, this ear deaf, this eye blind, this ear deaf, this lip hang down. If he speaks at all, it'll be with a lisp. The nerve endings on this side of the body have been destroyed. And that was the good news. The bad news was that I wasn't going to make it through the night.
When you said that prayer, you were a broken man, not a proud, arrogant man.
Totally.
And what happened?
Broken. I cried out in desperation. I didn't know Jesus as anything but a prophet. And I didn't cry out to Jesus. I said, God, if you're real, help me. And as real as I am here to you now, the Lord of the Christians healed me that night.
Well, you're Muslim. It wasn't Allah?
No, it wasn't.
Well, how do you know it was the Lord of the Christians? I'll tell you what, would you hold that thought, and we're going to be back right after this word, and we're going to find out how this Muslim said the God of the Christians revealed himself.
In a moment, find out how this man who looked like a leper experienced the impossible. Stay tuned.
Nasir Siddiki was in that hospital, and there was no hope. The doctors had given up. He was totally deformed. I mean, but nothing mattered. He was desperate. He had previously written out his will, and he prayed as a Muslim to God, and he got a shock. I understand a presence came in. Tell me about that.
Yes, I cried out to God that night, and I sensed a presence of the God of the Christians. I'm very careful with my words, Sid, because I want to be very accurate. And you say, how do I know it was the God of the Christians? It was more real to me than I am to you. Now, I can't tell you how tall or how big or what somebody looks like. I just know that I know that in my heart there was a presence there. It was the God of the Christians. It was Jesus Christ, the God of the Christians, that did something that night. And I didn't even know fully what he did until the same doctors walked in the next morning and said, it's gone into remission. It's not growing anymore. We don't know why it's not growing anymore.
Now, had you ever read the New Testament?
I was brought up in England, and so I was aware of Jesus that was known to the Christians as the Son of God, but as a Muslim, I was brought up believing that Jesus was a prophet, not the Son of God.
I know when I went to Africa, I went to Mombasa.
Yes.
And it's a Muslim stronghold, and
Yes.
big signs, God has no son. So that must have been a troubling thing for you.
Very much so. I could not understand. I was totally confused. And I kept thinking, is Jesus a prophet, the way I was brought up? Or is Jesus the Son of God? Well, the next morning they released me from hospital. I had a suitcase of all this medication they gave me, knockout drops, itch medicine, Caetril lotion. And I went back, and if you saw me walking on the street, you would have crossed over because I looked like a leper on this side of my body. It was still there, but it wasn't growing anymore. I got back home Saturday. Next morning, Sunday morning, I wake up at 6 a.m., get out of bed, I walk into my living room. I don't know why I got up at 6 a.m. I turned on the television set, and the talk show says, is Jesus the Son of God?
An interesting coincidence.
I have no idea what
It wasn't a coincidence. That was...
No,
Wow.
I don't know. Every single question in my heart gets answered alone at 6 a.m. in tears on my knees in front of a television set. I asked Jesus to come into my heart.
And this is wonderful. Now you're a Christian, and you've got a deformed face, deformed body,
Yes.
and you're going to live your whole life as the Elephant Man.
Yes, I cried out to God. I wanted to know who this Jesus was. See, I didn't know there was a Jesus the healer. I didn't know there was a God of love. But I knew that I was hungry to know him. I ran out the next day. I wasn't allowed to go out, but I went out and I bought a Bible. I started to find out who this Jesus is. I started to read the Gospels, and I found that Jesus is a God of love. And I cried out. I said, God, I don't want to look 75 years old. I don't want to look deformed. And every morning I would wake up and read my Bible. I remember that Friday morning I woke up and there were some blisters on the side of my pillow. And I said, oh, I shouldn't have touched them. The doctor said, don't touch the blisters. They're contagious. I got out of bed at 5 a.m. I went under the shower. And as I stood under that shower for 1.5 hours, I was praying and asking God, make me look normal again. Every single blister from the top of my head fell into the bathtub. Every single one. And the skin Sid underneath was raw, like red meat, all the way down. For the first time, I started to shave.
Just out of curiosity, now, was there one blister? I mean, I don't understand.
No.
Every one fell off?
Every single blister from the top of my head, the side of my face, my ear, my neck, my shoulder, my back, every single one came down. Not one was left. And the skin looked like raw meat, and then it started to turn white. And I thought, Lord, I don't want white blotches all over my face like I've been in a fire. But you know, every single thing came back to normal. I just have on my chest here just a patch now, just on my chest here. But my face, eyesight 20/20, my hearing is normal, my speech is okay, not too much brain damage, everything is fine. Jesus is alive and well.
Anita,
and
you are his wife today.
Yes.
The wife knows. Is he different than the man that you met, that man heading up $1 million corporation, successful, prosperous, and depressed?
He's a completely different man. He is a nice man now. He's got time for you. He's not driven the way he was before. He was driving himself into the grave just to become successful. Even within his success, it was never enough. Now he's a different man. He has peace within himself. He has peace with his God. He's a completely changed individual. I would have not married him the way he was before. Never in a million years would I have married him that way.
Nasir, this is how long ago?
8.5 years ago.
You imagined it.
No.
Jesus isn't real.
No.
I'll give you $1 billion to renounce him.
No, the only reason
And by the way, I don't have $1 billion, but I'll tell you,
Sid.
I would give you $1 billion, and I know you wouldn't take it, but the question that I have for you is, if you became as successful as Nasir, you said, oh, if I only had money, then I would be happy. Untrue. Nasir had everything, and he had nothing. You see, religion is what the world looks at God in a box. But God is bigger than a box. He wants you to know him. Put away the hypocrisy you've seen. Put away the tradition that you've seen. And say, God, I want to know you. And the only way to know God, is to believe Jesus died for your sins. There's no other way. There's no other name given unto men in which we must be saved. I urge you right now, pray with me. Say this prayer. Dear God, out loud, dear God, please forgive me. I'm sorry. I believe that Jesus died for my mistakes. I make Jesus my Lord. Come inside of me. Take over my life. I make you Lord over every area of my life. Amen. And now begin to thank him and learn more about the lover of your soul, Jesus. Start reading the New Testament as if you've never read it before. Believe everything that you see. And remember, if you need a miracle, you don't need a miracle. You need God. You don't need religion. You need God. You don't need tradition. You need God. And God wants you. That's the good news. Good news. It's good news. It's good.